but yeah. Let's see. Oh, I see one person. Here we go. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started shortly here. Welcome to the webinar. And let me just double check something. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started shortly. Welcome to our webinar.
Let's see if we can make this background a little bit more. That window needs a shade, but I don't think I'm going to do it.
All right, welcome, everyone. We've got a decent number here. Welcome. So it's 12:04 now. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone, to our People Like Us webinar. This is our third webinar, focusing on co-occurring conditions among veterans. So I'll be helping to facilitate the webinar. Our main speaker, though, is our very own Dr. Daniel Bochicchio, also Colonel. And he is the executive director of our VOA Hope Center, which is our certified community behavioral health center serving the Baltimore and Prince George's counties. And I'm the executive director of fundraising and development at VOA. I'm super excited to have you all join us and learn a little bit more about this important issue impacting our veterans. Next slide, Donna. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. So I briefly did introductions. In a moment, we'll do an overview of the medical and mental health issues that impact veterans. That will be led by Dr. Bochicchio. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end, and then just share a little bit about how you can continue to stay involved with our People Like Us campaign. But before we do that, I would like to take a quick poll. For those of you who are familiar, Zoom allows us to do this. So we're going to show a poll real quickly in a second here so we can better understand what has inspired you to come to this webinar today and just help us understand our audience a little bit better. So go ahead and take a moment to fill that opening survey out. Some of the questions are, what inspired you to join today's webinar? And then the second one is, how did you learn about today's webinar? So we'll give everyone a couple seconds there to fill that out. All right, looks like we're almost there. I think we're just waiting on one more person. All right, perfect. Donna, let's end the poll and then pull up the results. Okay, so it looks like for the first question, there were a decent number of you who felt that this topic is important to you personally. So thank you, we welcome you. There were a lot of you that feel this topic is important to those in my community. You're curious to learn more about this topic, which we're excited to share more about today. And then some of you are passionate about this topic and understand it really well already. For the next question about how you received information about this webinar, a lot of you, it was through a direct email invitation, which is awesome. So we're now going to jump into the main part of the slides here. So Donna, if you could move to the next slide, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Bochicchio. Oh, let's go back. I'm so sorry. Let's go back one slide, Donna. I nearly forgot about this other poll. So here's an opportunity for us to test your knowledge about some of the issues that impact veterans. We're going to use the chat function for this, though, instead of the poll function in Zoom. So what are some common healthcare issues for veterans? What do you think? What are some common issues? Go ahead and enter your responses in the chat. I see TBI, traumatic brain injury. Someone really knows this population really well. Thank you, Althea. Any other healthcare issues? Chronic pain. Thanks, Jennifer. Injuries incurred during services, aging. Very true. Any final thoughts? Depression, suicide. Thank you, Chaplain Joe. That is very true. Mental health, PTSD. Yes, that is a huge one. Substance use disorders. Yep. All right. So now we're going to reveal to you what we've identified as some of those top healthcare issues. So Donna, let's move to the next slide. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Bochicchio.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm Dr. Dan Bochicchio. I am the Executive Director of the Hope Center, as Nicole stated. I'm also a retired Army officer with about 30 years of commissioned service in the Army, both active duty and National Guard. So it's a pleasure to be here today and tell you a little bit about my professional knowledge of healthcare issues that are common for veterans, as well as common for a lot of folks, and also to share some of my personal experiences in dealing with some of these issues that come up as not only as a military member but as a veteran. As you can see, there are probably about 6 or 7 common healthcare issues from a mental health perspective that impact veterans. They're kind of listed there, not in any particular order of importance or brevity, just in the order of the way they came off the top of my head. So if we may have the next slide, please. Okay, great. Traumatic brain injury is one of the signature injuries of the conflicts over the last 20 years. It's always been around, but I think in the last 20 years, it's gotten a fair amount of press, as well as a fair amount of recognition for what it is. There are basically 4 different types of brain injuries that occur: concussions, contusions, penetrating injuries, and anoxic brain injuries. You're probably familiar with at least 3 or 4 of these. Concussions are not uncommon. They happen on the civilian side of the house as well. It can be boxing or football or soccer, or falling off your bicycle or falling off your motorcycle, or having a car accident where your head is impacted and by some type of violent blow to the head that causes some type of an injury. The contusions are just to give you some semantics. A contusion's a bruise on the brain. Contusions on the brain are no different than contusions anywhere else. It's a bruise. You can get that as a result of a closed head injury, being hit in the head, or falling, or smacking the head on the concrete, or from blast overpressure, which is how they frequently occur in combat zones. Penetrating injuries, impalement and crush injuries, as well as anoxic brain injuries. They occur both civilian and military side of the house. Strokes, drowning, cardiac arrest, strangulation injuries all-cause situations where the brain does not get enough oxygen and as a result sustains an injury. Next slide, please. Okay, great. This is from DOD data from 2017, looking at the incidence, or the type, I should say, of brain injuries that occur, among the population, among the military population. As you can see from the slide, most of these injuries are mild injuries, and that's important, and I'll explain why that is. You can see the distribution clearly is about 85% of brain injuries are mild brain injuries, with a very small percent of severe or penetrating injuries. It's important because mild traumatic brain injuries are difficult to diagnose. They're difficult to recognize. They're sometimes very hard to see. A severe brain injury or a penetrating injury, it's pretty obvious. It's pretty easy to understand why that individual would have issues, have brain issues after the injury, because the injury is glaring and very obvious to see. Next slide. Oh, go back one slide. We'll put some more finer point on that, please. If you just go back one slide. Yeah. So anyhow, like I said, in the diagnosis and treatment of mild traumatic brain injuries, like I said, they can be difficult to diagnose. Taking a thorough history, a physical examination, and screening over 3, 4, up to 2 years post-injury are all very, very important to the accurate diagnosis of mild traumatic brain injury. The reason why that is because, like I said, these can be hard to see. They could be very subtle in nature. You may not recognize a mild traumatic brain injury unless you really spend some time talking to the patient, dealing with the patient, and interacting with them, because the injury might be mild and it may present to you as symptomology that you may just attribute to that particular individual's personality. They might be a little bit more abrasive or a little bit more irritated, a little bit short of temper, but the people that know these individuals before and after will readily recognize these changes. Okay, could we just go forward? Go forward one slide, please. Okay, go for. I think that slide might be out of order, but we'll go for one more slide. Okay, great. So as I was saying, the physical symptomology of a mild brain injury is pretty obvious when it occurs. I've seen many of them. I've seen many of them acutely. You can usually know when when a soldier's got his bell rung pretty good, because they can pretty well describe the event, whether it was an IED blast, artillery shell detonating, a mortar going off, or some other type of overpressure that gave them concussed symptoms. A little bit more difficult to see after the acute physical reactions wore off. The sensory changes, blurry vision, ringing in the ears, like I said, relatively simple to see. Changes in taste, changes in smell and sensitivity, light and sound. If you speak to any number of individuals that have had closed head injuries, changes in vision and the way light affects them is not uncommon. If you know anybody who's ever had migraine headaches, they become very sensitive to light, and you'll see this with mild to moderate brain injuries also. But like I said earlier, the thing that's really hard to see are these cognitive, behavioral, and mental symptoms that can occur 3 months to 2 years after the injury, which may not have been apparent at the time of the injury. As I said, so multiple evaluations and screening people on a periodic basis over a prolonged period of time is probably the most sensitive way to identify these individuals who, like I said earlier, it may be very subtle changes. But some of the very subtle changes may be harbingers of more serious symptoms to come. And you want to catch them early because early treatment is always better. Okay, next slide. Okay. I know this is not a radiology conference, but some things in radiology are relatively easy to see. And I thought I'd put this up just to kind of show you. What you see here is a normal CAT scan of a brain. No, it's not mine, otherwise it wouldn't be normal, on the left. And on the right, you see a pretty good representative of diffuse axonal injury, which is a traumatic brain injury. Now, this is, like I said, this is a pretty significant injury. But I put it up there just to show you that some of the changes that occur, you can see that there's a significant change in the architecture of the brain, right? The brain on the right does not look anywhere near like the brain on the left. You can see that the sulci are kind of obliterated, those little indentations in your brain that, kind of, I don't know what it makes it look like, but anyhow, it's the folds in the brain. You can see on the right-hand side, they're pretty much obliterated. And also you can see there's a much finer granularity to the way that picture looks. It looks more like ground glass. And like I said, this is a very significant diffuse axonal injury. This is not going to be a subtle finding in an individual. But just so you have an understanding and a kind of a picture in your head of what traumatic brain injury could look like, if you show this to folks, if you show this to physicians, we all kind of know what it is. But when you say, just describe what you're looking at, it's very hard to describe because it's kind of a global thing going on here. There's not a specific area of the brain that seems to be more affected than one other. It's not like looking at a stroke or a penetrating injury or a fracture. Here, it's like the whole brain was affected by this. And that's kind of the way these diffuse axonal injury patients present. Now, like I said, that is certainly on the more serious side of traumatic brain injury than on the mild side. But these particular types of injuries can occur in individuals who, under other circumstances would have not survived this injury, except for the fact that they were very, very heavily protected, either in a vehicle or the body armor that they were wearing, or if they were not so heavily protected, or they weren't, if they weren't availed immediate health care, they probably would not survive. These injuries can be fatal anyhow. This type of brain injury is very severe in nature. And like I said, would not be a subtle finding. Okay, let's go back. Let's see, I think we had that one slide out of, yeah, there we go. Okay. Another very significant injury that's occurred as a result of, I shouldn't say that it's occurred as a result. Post-traumatic stress disorder has been around for a long time. It's gotten lots of different names depending on how far back in history you want to go. It was called shell shock. It was called battle fatigue. It was called combat neurosis, combat stress disorder. If you go back through history, it's always been well described in the medical literature of individuals who were exposed to various traumatic events and then manifested, symptoms and signs of an injury, which wasn't always which was not apparent on radiological examination. They didn't have any overt signs of an injury, but you knew you had an injury. And like I said, back in the Civil War, it was called shell shock, or First World War, it was called shell shock, battle fatigue. Vietnam, I think the name became more akin to combat neurosis, but you knew what it was when you saw it. You just couldn't figure out what it was or what caused it. You could tell that 1,000-yard stare when you look at your battle buddy, and the lights are on, but nobody's home. And he's been in the environment too long. He's totally overwhelmed. So like I said, there, if you Google battle fatigue, I'm sure you'll find plenty of pictures out there, or shell shock from the First World War. So, we're getting a little bit smarter as we go along. So we've got a little bit finer point on it, and it's now called post-traumatic stress disorder. 50 years from now, maybe they'll have another name for it. But the bottom line is, war really is outside the realm of normal human experiences, right? Being exposed to combat, being exposed to battle always fulfills one of the main criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. There are main criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. They're listed in the slides. I won't read them to you, but suffice it to say, you need to have an antecedent event. And that could be battle. It could be something that happened in your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be out on the battlefield. It could be culminative. It could be the culmination of multiple life experiences. And the quote, "the straw that broke the camel's back" was the last one, and it triggered PTSD. Not everybody in combat gets PTSD. Not everybody that's exposed to traumatic experiences in life develops PTSD. But the incidence, when DOD looked at it between 2002 and 2008, was about 20% of all returning veterans demonstrated some type or some degree of post-traumatic stress disorder for some period of time. And it could have been one of the symptoms that's listed in the slide: intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks of past traumatic events. We all have an aunt or an uncle that was in the war that never liked to talk about it. And you say, well, never talked about it, never talked about it. I had an uncle, I had a couple uncles. My Uncle Pete was a Marine at Guadalcanal in the Second World War. And even though, we commiserated because we were both military, but he would, even when I came back from my deployment, he still never liked to talk about, what happened at Guadalcanal and what happened at Saipan when he was in the Marines. And there are a lot of folks that don't like to talk about it because it reminds them of the traumatic events that they experienced. And as a veteran myself, I can tell you that there are, people say, well, what was it like? And we all quote have war stories. But for the most part, most veterans, as a rule, probably don't like to talk about it. And one of the reasons why you don't like to talk about it, it just reminds you. It reminds you of some of the things that you went through and the painful experiences, and you really don't want to relive those painful experiences. So they tend to avoid the traumatic, they tend to avoid the conversation, they tend to avoid their environments again. They don't go sticking their hand back on the hot stove after they got it burned a few times because they know that's hot and no, I don't think I'll do that. Sights, smells, noises. I can tell you I was in the military for a long time after my deployments, and even going out to the rifle range, just being on the rifle range sometimes would remind me of, that reminds me of that, the time we were below Habbaniyah, right? And, there was this cascade of small arms fire going back and forth. I was like, God, it reminds me just that, or a smell. I won't get into details, but suffice to say, there are various smells on the battlefield, various sites that tend to bring back those memories. And a lot of people with PTSD, they'll try to avoid those because everybody has their triggers, and some events are just you don't want to remember that again, right? Intrusive thoughts and nightmares. This is kicking down an open door. We all know that we occasionally have nightmares from traumatic events in our lives. Wake up in the middle of the night and the first thought in your mind was, oh, I remember that, right? In any event, there are some risk factors associated with the diagnosis of PTSD. Age of trauma. I always felt when I was deployed that one of the things that helped insulate me from some of the things that were happening in the environment around me was I wasn't an 18-year-old kid right out of high school. That this is, I went to basic training, I went to AIT, and here I am 18 years old and I'm in Iraq and I'm in the back of a tank and I'm running gun battles right every day. One of the things that helped isolate me was I was a 40-year-old lieutenant colonel that, trained at Maryland Shock Trauma Center, did trauma for a living. I was used to seeing people hurt, injured, and killed. I was used to working in high stress environments. And like I said, seeing bad things happen to good people all the time. And, you develop that level of maturity and that level of being able to divorce yourself from things that are happening professionally and things that are happening to you personally, right? But that was something that, in my mind, a lot of my young medics and a lot of my young soldiers, I would say, gee, I'm not so sure how well I would handle this if I was 18 years old. So, as a surgeon, as a battalion surgeon, we made some changes to the way we did things, way we did things in the field to accommodate that, because we realized that, the young single guys and gals were just not used to this. I was a battalion surgeon, so I had a lot of medics in my unit, obviously, and some PAs, nurses, and docs. And we were a frontline unit, and my medics were out with the troops all the time because that's what medics are. We made some changes so that if we had a bad event in the field and people really got injured and killed, I would send my senior medics out up on cleanup duty, and try not to have the unit that took the casualties doing battlefield cleanup. After the battle, I would send my senior medics out because they were EMTs in the real world. They had been EMTs, some of them for 10, 15, 20 years. They were out as civilian EMTs, and they were used to working in that type of environment. And they've seen bad things happen to good people. And it was better to do it that way, because I realized that, this may help prevent some of these young fellas from having to go through some of the events that would cause them to, have sequelae, now and in the future. So the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Defense, and DOD, and the American Psychiatric Association have probably developed one of the best tools for PTSD diagnosis. It's a checklist. It's got about 20 items on it. You rate it from 0 to 4. And in the end, you total up all the points. And obviously, the higher the score, the more likely you are to have PTSD. It's a good checklist. If you're a healthcare professional, I recommend that you take a look at it, perhaps use it. But it's best done if you do it now and do it again in the future, because PTSD symptoms don't always appear the day after you've been exposed to the stress. It could take weeks, months, sometimes years for that to occur, because sometimes it's cumulative. Sometimes it's not just the 1 or 2 events that occurred 2 years ago when I was deployed. It's the 3 or 4 things that have occurred since then. So post-traumatic stress disorder, like I said, we've called it all kinds of different things, but it is one of the signature injuries of the wars of the last 20 years. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I think I apologize. We kind of got a little bit out of order, but I think I discussed everything that's on this slide, with the exception, I would like to add the one caveat that that in the treatment of TBI, traumatic brain injury, it's a team effort. There is no one specialty or one area of expertise. It really takes a team working together to help recognize, identify, recognize, diagnose, and treat this, and treat it properly. So it really is a team effort. It's not just the behavioral health guys, the mental health folks. It's really it's the allopathic side and the somatic side of the house, because individuals with traumatic brain injury very often have other issues too. Whatever happened to them that got their bell rung that hard probably caused other injuries. So, okay, next item that we could probably discuss is the mental health impact of amputations. Amputations as a battle injury is not uncommon. If you know anything about Civil War history, amputations were very frequent. Medical care at the time had very few options to manage a gunshot or a blast injury to a lower extremity other than amputation. So they were done pretty frequently. However, in the last 20 years, we've had a significant number of individuals survive multiple extremity amputations, and they were previously injuries that they would have never made it home. If you would have had bilateral traumatic amputations on a battlefield, you probably would have not survived it to the aid station. You probably would have bled to death because that's just the way things were. So, but there are changes in the last 20, 25 years that have caused a significant change in outcomes and a significant reduction in the number of battlefield deaths, which kind of has this kind of perverse benefit that individuals that would have, like I said, ordinarily expired on the battlefield lived. When I was with a forward surgical team in Iraq, and not just our data, but the data by Army data too supported that if you arrived with a pulse at our FST or my aid station, there was a 90% chance or 95% chance that you would survive. And the reason for that is multifold. Modern battlefield healthcare has certainly improved. Tourniquets were, when I first started training in medicine, tourniquets were kind of this taboo thing, like, oh, you don't put tourniquets on people because they could lose the limb. But tourniquets luckily have made a huge comeback. Tourniquets, forward blood transfusions, forward surgical care, rapid evacuation from battlefield back to forward surgical teams has caused a 45% reduction in death rates on a modern battlefield. And like I said, tourniquets, the individual here in this picture, if their tourniquets were if tourniquets weren't available, it's more than likely he would have probably not survived that injury. There's another individual standing next to him. It's a little hard to appreciate that he's wearing shorts and he has bilateral lower prostheses on. Like I said, every soldier carries tourniquets. When things were really rough in Ramadi, my guys were going out. My line units were going out in their Humvees, and they would put a tourniquet on their arm and on their leg on the side facing the door of the vehicle, which I thought was pretty moribund until I realized, that's probably not a bad idea because the tourniquet's already in place, and if you get hurt, all you have to do is cinch it up. As opposed to struggling trying to get it put on, because tourniquets save lives. And like I said, we had modern blood banking capabilities and forward surgical care that would be able to, like I said, if you arrived basically alive, we would be able to keep you alive. And a lot of it as a result of the body armor that individuals wear. Your Kevlar helmet, although it's not bulletproof, is pretty close. Unless it's a direct shot by a rifle cartridge and relatively close, your Kevlar will probably stop it. You'll get traumatic brain injury from it because you're going to have your bell rung pretty hard, but you'll not have a penetrating injury. Handgun rounds, is few and far in between on the battlefield as they are. Your Kevlar will stop a handgun round, like a 9mm or 22 certainly. But you're also protected from the neck on down. Your chest plate and your back plates are bulletproof up to, well, let's just say for most rifle cartridges, they're pretty bulletproof. They do leave quite of a bruise. You don't think that, oh, this is bulletproof, it's not going to hurt. I've taken care of my guys that have come in and they've gotten shot in the chest, and you get a very significant bruise underneath that body armor. So it does not tickle. Matter of fact, it hurts quite a bit. But I had a picture to show you of the type of body armor that most guys wear. Eyes, ears, shoulders, neck, groin, all well protected. Although most guys I know did not like wearing the groin piece because it's just a little bit uncomfortable. But you're pretty well protected. But what's not protected is your extremities. So these very significant IEDs, that blow the nose of the vehicle off, you would survive, but your extremities would take the hit. So ordinarily, like I said, a blast that significant would have been a non-survivable event. You would have not survived that. Or you would have expired very shortly thereafter as a result of blood loss. So a lot of folks, a lot of soldiers, and individuals coming in have these very significant injuries that we're now able to salvage, which makes, like I said, in some ways it's kind of odd. It looks a little bit odd because you have folks that you would have not survived, or now 2 and 3 extremities that have been traumatically amputated, which in the past would have not have been a survivable injury. There is a significant mental health impact for amputations, as one would expect. Anxiety and depression and body image issues are very prevalent, as one might expect. You're a young soldier, you go off to war as healthy, viable, in good shape, and a year later or 6 months later you come home and you're missing a leg or an arm, and that's kind of difficult. It's kind of difficult for anybody, but like I said, it's significant. You can see it takes a couple of years to get used to the new you. And it's not uncommon to see some of my veterans, 2 years later, still dealing with anxiety, depression, and anger management issues because they lost an arm, they lost a leg, or they've lost 2 legs, because it's a tough injury to move forward with, especially you're young and you're married and you have a family, and you came home and you had a career when you left, and you came back and you realize you can't do the job that you were trained to do anymore. And you're now looking for new ways to support yourself and your family. So like I said, modern technology has done a tremendous amount to allow individuals with extremity amputations to have far more range of far more freedom and mobility. But still, even the best prosthetic in the world is not the same as having your own legs. So. But you will see folks out, and I give them a lot of credit to see individuals, not just veterans, who have had these types of injuries, and they're out skiing or running or riding a bicycle, and they're out living a full life despite the challenges they face. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, so we're going to take another quick poll to test the audience's knowledge before we move on. So what do you think, and you'll be using the chat function, what do you think are the first and second most widely used substances among veterans? So you can put the letter A, B, C, D, or you can put the actual name of the substance in the chat. So let's see what you think, the first and second most. All right, I see alcohol and THC. All right, some people selected A and C, C and B, alcohol and cocaine. All right, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, cocaine. Someone selected all of them, yes. Okay, so the correct answer is alcohol would be first, and then heroin. So we're going to jump to the next slide so Dr. Bochicchio can provide a little more detail. And Donna, next slide.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, we'll talk a little bit about substance abuse. Among veterans and non-veterans. The On the right-hand side, you'll see two different pie charts. This was taken from a study done back in 2013. And you can see among veterans, there is clearly a drug of choice, and it's alcohol. Whereas in the civilian side of the house, alcohol is still a very frequent drug of choice, but it is a smaller piece of the pie chart, than alcohol is among veterans. And there's a whole host of reasons for this. But I suspect among the veteran population, the reasons why alcohol is very common is A, it's socially acceptable, it's legal, God knows it's available, right? It's certainly more acceptable, and if you get caught, you don't go to jail. If you walk back into the barracks drunk and disorderly, yeah, you'll get smacked around a little bit. I don't mean that literally, but first NCO in your chain of command is probably going to get a piece of you for coming home looking that way. But it's not like you walked in the door and you tested positive for illegal opiates or illegal drugs. Since 1980, the Army, as all the military services have, been doing random drug testing, and the military has very, very little tolerance for illegal drug use. Quite honestly, if you're young, 17, 18, 19 years old, and you get caught with illegal drugs, you might get away with it, you might not. But clearly, if you're 25, 26, 27, you're an NCO, you got some time in grade, or you're an officer, and you have a hot urine test, you're out of the military. And that's all there is to it. There's very, very little negotiations if you get caught with illegal substances. So among veterans and among military personnel, if you're going to go out and abuse something beyond just smoking cigarettes, which of course is the most popular drug of choice for everybody, you're far better off if you go out and just drink some alcohol. So when we look at SUD disorders among veterans, you can see why alcohol still remains very popular, especially among active duty military personnel. Veterans who are out of the military, like I said, that pie chart shows you veterans are out in the military, but I think if we were to put the pie chart up for active duty military personnel, you'd find that there's probably a relatively small percentage of individuals who are abusing illegal drugs, because we do urine drug testing on a pretty regular basis. As you can see, I got plenty of gray hair, so I've been around the block a few times. I remember when I was back in ROTC, or back, well, I guess a little bit before my time with the draft Army, which is a few years before me. It used to be that if you threatened to throw somebody out of the military for doing something stupid, and they were a draftee, for the most part, they were pretty happy that you'd put them out of service, because a lot of folks did not want to be there. The volunteer Army in the last 30 plus years, as a commanding officer, I could tell you one of the most serious threats I can hold over one of my soldiers is to put them out in the military. Because everybody that was there wanted to be there. They were there by choice, and the thought of being put out of the service was just, like I said, that was a threat that back in the 70s and the 60s during Vietnam, being sent home and sending you home and discharging you from the military, a lot of people may have considered that to be a benefit, not a punishment. But that subsequently changed. So most folk will not play with illegal drugs because they know if they get caught, they're out. And I've had to discharge people from the service because of it. Because like I said, the rules have changed since the 60s and 70s. So among SUD, drugs of choice among SUD in the military and the civilian world are a little bit different. Now, having said that, the opioid crisis has affected everybody, to include veterans and I suspect people in the active military too. A lot of folks have access to legal substances of abuse because they're getting them on prescription, and the combat injuries and the chronic pain injuries associated with some of the wounds from combat have made opioid prescription pain medications among all individuals, military and otherwise, pretty common. So next slide. Okay, substance abuse disorder does not occur in a vacuum. There's been several studies, Brown in military medicine back in 2012, and Bahala also in psychiatric services back in 2018, published some real nice data. And basically what that data says is substance abuse as a disease does not occur in a vacuum, right? It is not uncommon. And as you can see, as a coexisting problem, as a coexisting disorder, people that have a substance abuse disorder, a third of them will have another mental health disorder, right? Over a quarter of them have post-traumatic stress, and then major depressive disorders and schizophrenia or other serious mental illnesses runs about a third. Now you can look at some data. I've looked at some various studies, and some said more, some said less. I've seen some studies that said as much as 50% of people with substance abuse have another coexisting mental health disorder. But numbers and numbers. I don't try to get too hung up on specific data or specific statistics, because it just doesn't, from a medical perspective, it doesn't make sense. The take-home message is, though, that if you have somebody who has a substance abuse disorder, you should have a very high index of suspicion that that individual may have another mental health problem too, because there's a 30% chance. And in medicine, when you're seeing 10 patients a day for a particular diagnosis, and 3 of them have a second diagnosis, if your antenna ain't raised high to see that, then you're not practicing good medicine, because this is such a common entity at 30% that you're going to see it, and you're going to see it every day. So, so this is important to know, because whether you have a friend, a relative, or you're in the business of treating these people, you should realize that if they have, if they're drinking a lot, or they're using illegal drugs, or abusing substances, there's a pretty good chance that there's something else going on too, and they are self-medicating for a reason. I'm thoroughly convinced nobody wakes up one morning, decides that they're going to become a drug addict, or they're going to become an alcoholic. People wake up in the morning one day and say, I can't deal with what I'm dealing with anymore, and I want to numb the pain, and this is the only way I know how to do it. And one thing leads to another, and their coping mechanism becomes a substance use disorder, because that's how they're going to cope with the issues. Like I said, but there are individuals out there who have serious mental health illness, that are also abusing substances. So if you have a friend or relative, or somebody, you should try to get them into treatment for not just their substance abuse problem, but you should also ensure that they're going someplace that's going to look at the other issues that may or may not exist. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Veterans Health Administration, VA, defines sexual assault and sexual harassment, military sexual trauma as sexual assault or sexual harassment that occurs in the military, or while on active duty or in reserve duty, whatever the case is. This includes coerced sexual activity, touching, grabbing, threatening, unwelcome advances, all the things that we would consider, inappropriate behavior towards another human, not just towards a member of the opposite sex, but towards at least another human being. In 2018, DOD did a study, as they have in the past, and they estimated about 20,000 service members were exposed to some form of sexual harassment, sexual trauma that occurred. And of these, 13,000 were females and 7,000 were males. But the sad part is only 6,000 cases were reported out of 20,000 that occurred. So that really means we have two problems here. The first problem is sexual trauma in the military and sexual harassment exists at a far higher level than we'd like it to. That's the first problem. The second problem is people that are people that are subjected to this type of behavior don't come forward and report. And that's even a bigger problem, because it's one thing, the only way you stop the bad behavior is you address the bad behavior. So for 20,000 people out of the 20,000, less than a third felt compelled to report that. And if you don't know that you have a problem, you can't treat the problem. So next slide. Okay, it is recommended by DOD, VA, and several other entities that clinicians always ask the questions, right? Because I can tell you, this is a topic that if you don't ask, you're never going to get a voluntary answer. So you have to ask. It's an uncomfortable question, and nobody likes to ask it. But as a physician, I get paid to ask uncomfortable questions because I'm trying to get to the problems, trying to figure out what it is we need to do to help you. It's like nobody likes to ask the questions, but you really have to ask veterans that during their time in the military, did they ever receive unwanted attention, pressure, coercion? Were you ever forced, or did anybody ever force themselves on you? And if so, did you report the incident to your chain of command? Because if you don't ask those questions, you'll never get any answers, and you'll never be able to address the problem. Now, like I said, as we know, this occurs both in the military and outside of the military. And I don't like to cast a shadow on anybody or anything, but this is a problem that exists in society. It tends to be more female than male. And it tends to be provoked by males more than it is by females. But we all know, like I said, this is really gender independent. It doesn't matter if you're harassing or coercing or forcing yourself on another human being. It doesn't make a difference what sex you are or what sex they are. It's completely independent. Now, there are things in the military that are unique to the military, and they do tend to put you more at risk for this type of behavior. And as we all know, the military is the military. It tends to be very organized, very rigid, and well, not very rigid, but certainly rigid enough, and very well organized. And military duty is not always a walk in the park. You're expected to do things that most people don't want to do or don't like to do. You're expected to be cold, tired, miserable, and uncomfortable, and haven't had a shower in a week. And you know what? That's your job. That's the job. So being tough and being able to still work under austere circumstances, under adverse circumstances in a scary environment, tends to breed people that are very independent and very self-reliant and don't like to ask for help. And it's not just for sexual trauma. This is for PTSD or substance abuse. I mean, this goes back to the entire topic of stigma, right? Most people don't want to say, this person put their hands on me. It made me very uncomfortable. It really hurt me, right? That this individual touched me, grabbed me, did this, or propositioned me, or threatened to do something. And if I didn't do something I didn't want to do, just like you would not go to, it's like you would not go to your first sergeant complaining that it's cold, or I'm hungry, or my socks have holes in them. This military service breeds people that are trained to be independent and self-sustaining. Therefore, the thought of asking for help is certainly not encouraged sometimes. And this is one of those topics where most people will not encourage you to come forward and complain and state that this is what occurred to you, because it goes against it. There's a stigma associated with this, just like there's a stigma associated with having a substance abuse problem or a drinking problem or explosive personality disorder, or anything else where it's not right, but you don't want to expose yourself to the criticism. That you're not capable of doing your job, you can't take care of yourself. Right. Like I said, nobody in their right mind would go to their first sergeant and say, "Hey, Top, I'm cold," because you probably know what you get if you're in an infantry unit. I can tell you exactly what your first sergeant would give you. We call that the snivel blanket, because that's part of your job. So now, having said that, there are behaviors and things that you should not have to put up with, and it's because they're not right. They fly against the principles of the military. It is certainly, in the Army, it's duty, honor, courage, commitment, integrity, country, and service. And I don't see any one of those lists. I don't recall anything on that list that says I have to be sexually abused by, Joe Bag of Donuts, right? Or I have to put up with these types of jokes. Or, I have to put up with him constantly putting his hands on me. Right. That's not, I don't see that anywhere I don't see that written anywhere in the military where it says I have to put up with that. But having said that, the military service in and of itself does put young people in some very difficult and challenging experiences and positions. I can tell you, when I was in my first deployment in Iraq, I was with an armored battalion as a battalion surgeon. And back in 2005, there was no such thing as a female in a line unit. If you're infantry, armor, field artillery, there were no females to be found anywhere within sight. Now, I had come from a medical company, so I was used to having female medics in my unit. But when I went to a line unit, there were no females around. There was none, period. There was like female in an armored battalion. It was just unheard of. So when they wanted to put a female medic in my unit, because I really needed a female medic, because we were dealing with Iraqi civilians all the time and Iraqi female civilians, I really did need a female medic. My battalion sergeant major was besides himself. He did everything he could to stop that from occurring, because he was concerned that she would not be well treated. And I could tell you, when I built her hooch, not only did we build the walls in her hooch almost all the way up to the ceiling, but the gap that was left was covered with concertina wire and razor ribbon, and she was the only one that had a lock on the inside of her door, as opposed to the outside of the door like all the other Joes. She had locks inside and outside, so she could lock herself in her own hooch. I didn't do that because I was worried, but I did that. I did that intentionally because I was like, let's see if we can avoid the problem, because you have individuals that have been deployed for, will turn out to be a year plus in a combat environment. And, they're young, they're single, men and women, and they're by themselves in a scary environment. And, people are people, right? So just to avoid things from happening. But it's only in the military where you find yourself in a situation where you're put into these unusual environments, being deployed on a ship at sea or in a submarine with members of the opposite sex or a sex that you're attracted to, and then being told that you cannot and should not engage in anything that's not professional behavior or professional relationships. So unlike the civilian side of the house, this is a problem in the military that requires special attention and requires special training, and it requires that you pay close attention to the goings-on and the behavior of your young individuals in the unit, because people are people and they won't always do the right thing. So anyhow, there is a safe helpline. It's actually run, it's a .org, but actually it's funded by Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs. where current and former members can call up anonymously and confidentially. And one of the things that I really like about it, it's peer-to-peer. So if you want to talk to another peer, you can get on and you get in contact with another peer who's been through the things that you've been going through, and it makes it very easy to have that open conversation and get some help to address the issue. So, next slide. Okay, we know that suicide is an issue. It's an issue both in the military and it's an issue on the civilian side of the house. Prior to 2001, suicide rates in the military were essentially the same as they were on the civilian side of the world. The per 100,000 suicide rate was essentially the same. And right after we started engaging in combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, returning veterans started having higher rates and suicide rates in the military went up. It is now to the point where suicide rates in the military are essentially equal to what they are on the civilian side of the house. A frequently quoted number by the VA is about 22 veterans a day commit suicide. And that's been a pretty steady number. Obviously, the mode of suicide for veterans tends to skew very heavily towards firearms, which is not surprising. I worked for the Veterans Administration for a number of years, and we used to say the one thing that every veteran in this place has in common is they all know how to use a gun because they were all trained to use weapons. So it's not surprising that most veterans that do commit suicide tend to use firearms to do it. They don't use their issued weapon if they're active duty military or reserves. They use their own personal firearms that they have at home. However, there are a few things that correlate with suicide ideation and suicide plans and attempts, and that's individuals, like I mentioned earlier, that have coexisting medical and behavioral health issues. Obviously, major depressive disorder, age, post-traumatic stress, alcohol use and substance abuse, and adverse childhood experiences all increase your risk for attempting suicide or succeeding at suicide. Second to firearms, hanging probably makes up about 30%. So about 60% of all, 65% of veteran suicides and military suicides tend to be firearms. Another 30% is done by hanging. And then the balance of the 100% is all others. Now that's very different than on the civilian side of the house, because even among female veterans, the number one method to commit suicide is still firearms. And on the civilian side of the house, that number is completely turned upside down. That is number 4 or 5 on the list if you look at the method of committing suicide among females. Female veterans are almost 2 times more likely to experience suicidal ideations and suicide attempts than their non-veteran counterparts. I'm not going to speculate as to why that might be. I suspect military service is certainly I don't want to say is a risk factor, but I suspect some of the reasons why they are considering taking their own lives probably have to do with their time spent in the military, because their civilian counterparts have not had those stressors and have not had those experiences. A really good reference to look at if you're inclined is the National Veteran Suicide Prevention website. The Department of Veterans Affairs operates a number of very good websites for individuals and professionals. There's a lot of information posted on the website. If you go to va.gov, you can find all kinds of veteran-related information, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. So, okay, next slide. All righty. Reintegration and readjustment. If you're curious, yeah, it's me. I'm in the picture. These pictures are taken from my first deployment in Iraq back in 05, right? Sure, 05, 06. So probably two of the most stressful times of a deployment is going and coming, right? And you would think that would not be the case. But I think if you talk to a lot of veterans or military personnel, they'll tell you, and I can speak from my own experience, that the worst part of my deployment was the week to get there, because it took a week to go from Fort Bliss to Iraq. It was in transit for a week. And coming home was the same thing. It was a week, and I made it home quick because I wasn't traveling with my full unit. They're stressful periods, and you'd think coming home would be happy, joyous, and free, and you'd be all excited, and everything is great. But that reintegration and readjustment period can be prolonged. There's usually a honeymoon phase that occurs at the beginning where everybody's happy to see you. Everybody's happy that you're home, everybody's happy to see you, but then you realize you've been gone for a year, and things are not the same as they were when you left. Things changed. Number one. Number two, there I was minding my own business, doing my thing, and now it's a week later and I'm back home. So the picture on the left, you're right, it is me. It is a younger me. It's me. God, it's hard to believe that's 16 years ago. This was these pictures always make me laugh. This is a mission. We were below Lake Habbaniyah. I was in Ramadi, which is west of Baghdad, out in El Anbar, and just west of Fallujah. And actually, Fallujah is between Ramadi and Fallujah is Lake Habbaniyah, which is a big lake. But we hadn't been down the bottom of the lake, which was about 30, 40 miles away from our fob easily in a number of months. So we decided to mount the mission down there and go down and do some humanitarian assistance and, try to do some good stuff. Number one. Number two, do some recon down there and find out what exactly is going on down in that part of below Lake Habbaniyah. So we were out on, any one of a number of missions, but anyhow, this one went down there. And the reason why I'll tell you, I'll get to the punchline here. So this was a combat op. We had no idea what we were walking into. We didn't know if these would be friendly people, not friendly people. We'd walk into a hornet's nest or we'd walk into some folks that would be happy to see us, right? So, of course, as a medical officer, my job was to go down there, do a medical assessment and try to figure out what the civilian population needs and what we can provide for them. In addition to what I already knew, which was we were going down there to do childhood vaccinations because the Iraqi government basically Saddam's government basically cut that part of El Anbar off from public health. So we were going down to do MMR, OPV, all the usual good stuff. And like I said, we went down there not knowing what to expect. So after, my line units went in, cleared the town, make sure there was nothing bad. We parked just outside of town and then went into one of the local clinics, started seeing people. But so there you're down there, you're doing good things. You think everything is all fine and dandy. But like I said, you don't know. You just don't know what the environment is going to be, because it could be, the enemy's not wearing, they're not wearing uniforms. As a matter of fact, the guy in the middle of that picture with the IMS shirt that's staring at the camera, when somebody's looking at you, that they want to kill you. They just don't have the means to do it at the moment. But I had eyeball to eyeball contact with that fella, and I knew. What you don't see is you see the one security guard, my one PSD guy standing next to me, wearing the shades, carrying a carbine. What you don't see is there's two more of them standing on top of my armored personnel carrier with M4 carbines, keep an eye on the crowd, because you never knew what was going to happen. It could be all very well and good, and the next thing you know, an IED goes off, or somebody starts shooting some stuff up, or they roll a grenade in, or so. Like I said, you kind of never knew what you were going to get. So you were always having to pay attention to the environment. And you were supposed to, keep your wits out there. It's a combat zone, right? It's not a walk in the park. But, we were there doing good things, and the little kids, of course, are happy to see you, and you're throwing candy out and doing vaccinations. And my female medic, who's not in that picture, was off with the translator talking to the women in the clinic. And like I said, you think it's a very successful operation, and you're on your way home, and there's a picture missing from this, but that's okay. My Bradley on the way home in the right-hand picture, it's not parked over the other side of the curb. We actually struck an IED on the way home, and it blew the track off the Bradley, broke up the front drive wheels, broke up a couple of suspension wheels, cracked the chassis, put a hole in the block, put a hole in the chassis on that side. Luckily nobody got killed, but it was a pretty good sized detonation, and not the first time, right? So, like I said, one day this is the world that you're living in, and they are bebopping around, minding your own business, doing your thing, and you're on your way back to the fob, and you hit an IED, and that just ruins the whole day, right? And just reminds you. And then, you're doing this, you're doing your missions, you live in this environment, and then a week later, you're home on the block, and you're back with your friends and your family, right? And the guy giving you the hairy eyeball may not be giving you the hairy eyeball. He just might not be, right. He may not be standing there thinking about killing you, or anybody that pulls up close to you in traffic is not getting ready to detonate a car bomb on you. So the period of readjustment can be very difficult. You come home, and like I said, it's a completely different world than what you've been living in for the last 6 months, year, 18 months. And with the flip of a switch, now you're back in civilian society. Where driving up the middle of the road is no longer acceptable. You have to drive on the right-hand side of the road. What do you mean I have to stop for stoplights and drive on my side of the road? I drove a lot because I like to drive, and we drive in the middle of the road. And, if you don't stop when we're coming through an intersection, I'm going to hit you with a 35,000-pound armored vehicle because I'm not stopping. Right. And if you get too close to me, I'm going to shoot you. And there's no discussion. Right. Anybody that looks threatening, you point the gun at them. You make sure they're not a threat. And then you come home and you find out that, you're back around the neighborhood again, and kids are playing, and you're outside. And like I said earlier, things are not the way they were when you left. So that period of readjustment can be very difficult, both for you and your family. You've been gone for a while. Mom or dad is now used to cooking dinner and taking care of the kids and doing all this stuff. And then you come flying in the front door, happy to be home. But what do you mean we don't eat at 6 o'clock anymore? Or why are we having that? Because I don't like that. Or, I want to do this weekend. Right. And all of a sudden you're back in the picture, and, like I said, you're not the same. Home is not the same. Your friends aren't the same. And you have to go through a period of readjustment, which is why I say when you evaluate people for post-traumatic stress or substance abuse or traumatic brain injury, it's not a one and done evaluation. You gotta continuously look at them over a prolonged period of time to make sure that, things are not going to surface that, did not surface during the honeymoon period. I remember thinking when I first came home from both of my deployments, how incredibly spoiled people are, and how struck I was by how mad people would get about such stupid things like traffic or the light, or something's not in the grocery store that I wanted to go buy. And, or just day-to-day things that were, for the last year, to me, were like, you got to be kidding me, right? You get mad over that. I'll give you a reason to get mad, and that's not it. Yeah, there's traffic. That's nice. But yeah, it struck me as how petty a lot of stuff in life seemed to be. But for the folks that have not been where you are, to them, it's important. So your daughter missing a dance recital, to me, I was like, it's just a dance recital. What's a big deal? But to her, it was very important. But my priorities have changed. So like I said, if you have a friend, a relative, a loved one that comes home from a deployment, which thank God now we're few and far in between, That period of readjustment could be very stressful for the veteran, and it can be very stressful for you also. One of the things, like I said, I split my career between active duty time and the National Guard. And, one of the studies that we looked at, and one of the things that we knew in the National Guard when I was state surgeon is we had to pay particular attention to developing social structure and structure for my returning National Guardsmen, because Maryland deployed a lot of National Guardsmen to Iraq and Afghanistan on multiple deployments. And on the active duty side of the house, when if you deployed with 2nd Infantry Division to Afghanistan, when your brigade comes home, you go back to home station and the whole brigade is back. You're back on the block, but you're still in the military. You still have military responsibilities. You're still putting your uniform on. The transition's a lot easier because the only thing that's changed really is where you work. Your job hasn't changed. You still have the same platoon sergeant, the same company commander, right? The same friends in the unit. Now you're back at home station, and that's great. Everybody's happy. In the National Guard, when you come out of uniform and you go back to your civilian side, all that military social structure that was surrounding you is now gone. So, you may have been artillery battery commander in Iraq, and now you come home and you're back working at Walmart, and only 1% of the American population is in uniform, not even, less than 1%. So you have nobody to commiserate with. You can't just walk up to your battle buddy and say, dude, man, I had this dream last night. You remember that time we were over by the mosque and the thing blew? Oh yeah, dude, I remember that. Right. You can't just walk up to one of your coworkers. Even as a physician, when I came back, my coworkers would not understand. Right. I had this bad dream last night about this guy that got shot between the SAPI plates and a chest tube, and he died. Right. He died died in my arms on the way back. They can't understand that. Or, you saw something else, something else bad happened. So Guard and Reserve individuals who go back into civilian world are at higher risk because they've lost a lot of that social net that says you're still a soldier, you're still a Marine, right? You're still in the organization, you still have your friends. So, just keep that thought in mind. So, okay, last slide, I think. Okay, so talk a little bit about, we at the Hope Center is a certified community behavioral health center. And also we just picked up another grant to become a community mental health center. So why do I say that? I say that because, as you could see from the previous slides, most people don't come back with most people don't have, whether it's civilian or military, mental health, substance abuse. Rarely do you have one problem, right? Like everything else in life. If you have high blood pressure, you have diabetes. If you have diabetes, you might have some high blood pressure. If you have a thyroid problem, you might have a little bit of, right? Problems occur. They tend not to occur in isolation. It's rare, especially as folks get older. So what it takes to provide services for veterans is it really is a multidisciplinary team approach to provide high quality care to veterans and their families. Many issues are common to, occur in veterans, occur out in the civilian side too. So it's not, this is not rocket science, and it certainly crosses over to the civilian side, which is one of the beauties of the Hope Center, is that we provide an integrated model and a whole of person model towards taking care of behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse, primary care issues. You want to treat the whole patient. You want to treat the whole individual, both, mentally, physically, and spiritually, because that's where you get the best results. When you treat one problem and you don't treat the other problems, like I used to tease my friends in orthopedic surgery, they'd say, well, the bones look great. Yeah, but the guy's dying. Yeah, but the bones look great. Orthopedic guys have a funny sense of humor, and I was in the intensive care unit. I'd say, yeah, but the guy's septic is all beat out. He's on maxed out on a ventilator. Yeah, but that femur fracture looks great. You got to treat the whole patient. You got to treat the whole individual. Otherwise, you run the risk of fixing one problem and ignoring another problem. So at the Hope Center, that is clearly what we tried to do. We try to integrate our services. so that no matter what you come in the door for, we will look at you 6 ways from Sunday, evaluate you every way that we can, and then, say, okay, these are the things that we see, these are the things that you may benefit from. And it might be 1 service, 2 services, 4 services, but we try to make you whole again and to address all your issues and make sure that we get things get you taken care of. So think multidisciplinary and think integrated. That's the future of medicine. It's not where medicine has come from, but it certainly is where medicine should be going to. Okay, and then the last slide, and I'll close with that, is a list of resources, both that are both military, or that are both governmental and non-governmental. We'll spit that out. Okay, next slide. There are a lot of good resources out there. So some of them are, like I said, some of them are military. Co-Chief for Care is a very good one run by the VA. It's a great resource to look at. Caregiver support. One of the things that we know in the VA is, seriously disabled veteran, the spouse winds up spending a lot of time trying to take care of folks, trying to take care of her husband or wife, child, whatever the case is. So there's a caregiver support program. It's an excellent program. A lot of folks are concerned about going to the VA or going to the military. A lot of my veterans still prefer not to use the VA. They prefer to use other resources. Veteran service organizations. When I worked at VA headquarters, I developed a tremendous appreciation for what these guys bring to the table. Disabled American Veterans, the American Legion, Wounded Warrior, Vietnam Vets. You're familiar with all of these, VFW. Some of them have been around a little time. Some of them have been around for a very long time. If you're a veteran or a family member of a veteran and you have a question, the VSOs are there to help you. They're there to, they're there. If you have a question and you don't know whether or not you qualify for a benefit or you want to file for your benefits, when I left the military and I was a senior colonel with 30 years of service, I called my buddies over at the VFW and I said, what do I need to do? Because they made it very easy for me to figure out what paperwork I needed to get taken care of. So to get my retirement and all that other good stuff. So yeah, the VSOs, and there's a plethora of them out there, are great organizations. And if you have any questions, they are happy to help you. They used to come to my hospital and set up out front and just stand there and and help people ask questions about where to get the services that they were looking for, and they will advocate for you, which is good because they know the system and they know how to advocate. Because as much as I love the VA, it's a big federal bureaucracy, and it's really easy to get lost sometimes. Sometimes you need an advocate that knows what belly button to push. Okay, that's enough for me. So. Nicole, I'll turn it back over to you and to questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Bochicchio. That was awesome and very informative. We'll now open it up to questions from the audience, questions, comments. You can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can simply put it in the chat. So we'll let you all ask some of your questions.
Put my glasses on, let's see. I'm looking through the chat. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't see any new questions just yet. But I'm personally wondering, Dr. Bochicchio, for veterans that come into the VOA Hope Center, what are some of the common symptoms or challenges that you're dealing with or seeing that they're dealing with coming into the center?
Well, I think one of the advantages that the VOA offers to taking care of both active duty military personnel and veterans is, stigma remains an issue. As much as we like to say, that it's not, and we, tried, I got to tell you, some folks just, they're afraid to ask for help. Now, and I will say, and some degree, this is in part, some of it's the military, it's a military problem, because, as a commanding officer in a dock, if one of my guys comes in and they go to a physician, they go to a military doctor for help, and they get help for an issue, it goes into the military medical jacket. And as a commander, I can always pull my military medical records from my guys because I'm the commander and I can look and see. So if you're in there talking about something that I think might be problematic or might be interfering with your job, if it's a significant issue, the military medical healthcare system is kind of under the obligation to let me know, right? Right. Because, right, as a commanding officer, a chain of command gets informed. So that kind of keeps a lot of folks, even reservists, even National Guard guys. Like I said, I was in the Guard for a long time. I was state surgeon for 10 years. Plenty of my soldiers I knew went to outside healthcare because they did not want that problem to put into their 201 file. So as the Hope Center, we have the advantage of being off the radar. So if you come to see us for an issue, it's not going to make it back to your chain of command. Whether you're active duty, reserve, retired, it doesn't matter. What you say to us stays with us. And that gives it a safe environment to really say what's on your mind and say what you need help with. Now, obviously, if you're a danger to self or others, that's a whole different story. That's a reportable thing. But for the most part, if you're being treated for anxiety or depression, if you have a high level security clearance, the only thing that you don't ever have to disclose is if you go into marriage counseling. But if you're seeing a counselor or a therapist and you have a TS clearance, top secret, or these things have to be disclosed, and not everybody wants to disclose because that they're having a bad hair day, or so coming to us is one of the mechanisms that we'll put in place to allow individuals to get the help they need without having to worry about being stigmatized. As you can't trust Joe, he's dealing with depression or anxiety, or right. So that's a big advantage that we do offer. And it's not a secret, military knows. As a matter of fact, the National Guard Bureau, I was part of the original program to set that up at the National Guard, to have private individuals come in at the state headquarters, so that my soldiers and airmen would have somebody to go talk to that was not in the military, that was not official, totally off the record, right? And the VOA, and we offer that in the Hope Center too, which is a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Bochicchio. Are there any other questions? Oh, I see one from Keith. Any idea of the comparative incident rates of PTSD, so civilian versus military, especially given wartime trauma many citizens around the world are facing now? So, citizens that are involved in war in one way or the other, but maybe not necessarily a part of the military. And any thoughts about rates of PTSD between those populations?
Just anecdotally, from my exposure to talking to folks in Afghanistan and Bosnia and Iraq and some other places that I've been in, it seems like there is a significant incidence, because these things affect everybody everywhere. I don't think you could be living as a civilian in Afghanistan right now without having some kind of mental stress or stress-related issues. Even when I was in Bosnia, right after the wars in Bosnia in the 90s, a lot of people were having adjustment issues and difficulty dealing with it. Do I know the exact statistics off the top of my head? Actually, I don't. I can certainly look into it and see if I can come up with something for you. But it is becoming well recognized. Most people did not like to talk about it. I mean, right? It was the silent disease that, well, there's nothing wrong with you. You look fine, right. Right. You need to grab yourself by the bootstraps and get yourself squared away again, But I can't imagine that places, where there's been conflict for decades, people are not suffering from mental health disorders, because it's just not natural to live in an environment where there's been war for 40 years.
Mhm. Thanks for the question, Keith. Any final questions? I know we're at 1:31 right now, so if there's maybe one more question, we can take that. And then we'll close out with a final slide and a quick survey. All right, I'm not seeing any in the chat. So a little bit about how to stay involved with people like us. Again, this webinar is a part of an anti-stigma campaign that we have launched along with our VOA Hope Center in Prince George's in Baltimore County. So I see Donna threw up our closing survey. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to fill that out really quickly. Just kind of want to get your feedback on today's webinar and if you'd like to stay in touch with us. And while you're doing that, I'll let you know that there are a few different ways you can stay in touch with us. So we have a Facebook group online, and after this webinar, I will be sending a link to the slides. That way you have that and to the recording of today's webinar in case it's difficult to remember all the links. But we do have a Facebook group you can join. We update pretty frequently. We're also inviting the community to share their personal mental health stigma stories. So if you or someone you know has a compelling story to share, we'd love to incorporate that into our campaign as a way of encouraging more conversation around mental health. And if you would like to become a partner, or your organization would like to become a partner, maybe co-host a webinar with us, we'd love for you to reach out to us. And there's an email address there for you to do that. And then also we encourage you to visit our campaign landing page, which is voa-plus.org. That's where you can also stay up to date on what's happening and share with others in your community. This is very much a community-driven campaign. So we'd love to have you get involved and others as well. Other than that, thank you so much for being a part of today's webinar. And thank you, Dr. Bochicchio, for leading the way. If you have any questions or things like that, feel free to reach out to us. And again, I'll be sending a follow-up email with the PowerPoint and the recording to the webinar. So I hope you all have an awesome Friday.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, guys. Good seeing you. Enjoy your weekend.